The equality rights? Steffi's ready to go shopping. That's what I'm hearing today at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday. What was the Article 6? It had two specific parts.
Gives federal law precedence over state law.
Article 6 was the Supremacy Clause. And it basically said for the first time, and you're right with this, Article 6 for the first time said that if a state law disagrees with the Constitution, then the federal Constitution will win. And this was a big deal because if you remember, in terms of federalism, at the beginning, the states were the big powers. Article 6 and that Supremacy Clause gradually began to turn that debate so that today it's now the federal government that's the one that's the big power. What was the second part that did deal with religion? Anybody? Go ahead.
A person didn't have to swear to office to run or to go into office.
Didn't have to swear to office?
Swear on the Bible.
Yeah.
You didn't have to take a specific religious oath as a qualification for office. So you didn't have to pledge allegiance to a religion. You didn't have to deny a religion. There was no religion part of it at all. So those were the two parts. And really the bigger one for our purpose is probably the Supremacy Clause, Caprice, that you mentioned. But with that said, the second one dealing with no religious test, that was one of the few references to religion in the Constitution before the amendments came about. Any other terms that you've got questions about up here?
Balancing.
What was balancing?
Courts,
What's that?
the courts, and the president,
Courts and the president.
and the legislature.
That's separation of powers.
Balancing was actually an example when we were talking about ways to interpret the Constitution. There was original intent, there was stare decisis, and there was balancing, if you remember. And I believe the term that was used, it said in the outline omit, but in fact the term was
Vomit.
How does vomit deal with balancing? Go ahead.
Okay, you can go.
Somebody go.
Okay, basically it was because they had one guy who they suspected of drug dealing.
Morphine.
They basically barged into his house, saw him
Legally?
run across. They had a warrant.
Had a warrant, yes
but
they did.
They barged into his house, saw him run across the room, pop something in his mouth, and swallow it. And so basically, they had him taken to a hospital to pump his stomach in order to save the evidence.
Yeah, now think about this.
Which-
the balancing is going to be the Fourth Amendment dealing with reasonable, or in this instance maybe unreasonable searches and seizures. The other part of this is basically going to be dealing with this criminal trial and the idea that there is evidence that is at stake here. And when you think about this, they did announce their presence, they did have a legal warrant, they heard some commotion in the back, they went back there, ultimately he swallowed something in front of them, and if you remember when I'd asked the classes about this, many of you thought that if you were a police officer and somebody ran and swallowed something in front of you, that in fact they swallowed something that they really didn't want you to see. So there was a suspicion there that he had done something wrong. They forcibly took him from his house. They forcibly took him to a hospital. Doctors forcibly pumped his stomach or made him vomit against his will. And when he vomited, what did they find?
They found
They
the
found
morphine.
the very morphine that was on the warrant. And now the debate is, can we use this morphine ultimately to gain a conviction? What did the court say?
So they couldn't do it.
So they couldn't. Why not?
So they forced it out of him.
Well, it was the reason that he forced
Not
it.
for his safety.
If they would have said, we're pumping your stomach for your safety, thank you, Laura. If they would have said that we're pumping your stomach for your safety, then yeah, this would have been allowed. But why did they say that they were pumping the stomach?
To get the
To save
evidence.
the
To
evidence.
save the evidence. And the court said, Justice Felix Frankfurter said, this shocks my conscience. How can you do something like this? I had given you the example, too, of somebody whose boyfriend was cheating on them. And they had given up. Basically, they said, I'm fed up with this. And they choked the boyfriend because he continued to cheat. And they had blood on the fingernail. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the difference between the fingernail case and between the invasive search case?
Well, if,
Did-
for the bloody fingernails, if you walk in there, not and try to
Wipe it off.
wipe it off in your pockets,
Yeah.
then it proves that you
It's because it
You're
was
trying to
it was
destroy evidence.
it
The
was
other
visible.
thing, though, when you think about it, is that you don't need a doctor to get this off of your nails.
Yeah.
So she went in there. She was trying to destroy the evidence in front of them. They didn't have a warrant. They didn't read her rights, but it was legal because 1, she was destroying evidence, and 2, she voluntarily went into the police station.
Yeah.
And 3, they didn't need a doctor. It was on the outside.
Voluntary
When they
destruction
needed
of
a doctor to
evidence
force somebody to
in a police
vomit something
station.
up on the inside, that's going too far. Now, one other thing too, if there's a search that's going on, and I can't remember if I mentioned this all in the classes or no, but if you volunteer evidence, you don't need a warrant either. So, for example, you know, in the South, what we do sometimes is if we detain somebody, we'll feed them a lot of chicken gizzards and collard greens. And the idea is that the chicken gizzards and the collard greens stimulate your digestive functions. So if we want to figure out what they've got inside of them, if we stimulate those functions, they're technically volunteering evidence if they were to vomit something up or if they were to have a bowel movement. I can't believe I'm doing this on camera. So the idea is, when you think about it, these kinds of things, they could be used against you because you volunteered the evidence. So keep that in mind. In this instance, he wasn't volunteering it. It was forced out of him. But had he just vomited it up, and something came up, they could have actually used that even if they didn't have a warrant. So keep in mind that balancing. Any others that you can think of? Go ahead.
Stare decisis.
What was stare decisis? What does it literally mean?
Let the decision stand.
It literally means let the decision stand. And I believe I had given you 2 examples of stare decisis. One that's probably not ever going to get overturned and one that more than likely will. Go ahead.
First one was abortion.
Abortion's been around for a long time. And the idea
40
behind
years or
stare
something?
decisis is that if you plant a tree, the longer you let it grow, the harder it's going to be to get out of the ground. Stare decisis regarding abortion has been over 40 years now, and you may approve of it, you may not, but the roots are pretty deep in American society after 40 years. What was the other example?
Gay marriage?
No, it was not gay marriage.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Pledging allegiance.
Pledging allegiance. What religious group were we talking about?
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, Jehovah Witnesses.
The Jehovah's Witnesses in West Virginia refused, if you will recall, refused to stand and pledge allegiance in old-time West Virginia. What happened to these kids? What was their argument, I guess?
That it, I guess, essentially was against their religion, and like to swear an oath to.
They don't pledge allegiance to worldly bodies. So the idea is that if you make us do this, then in fact what you're really doing is violating our free exercise or First Amendment freedom of religion rights. Now let's turn this around. What was the school's argument for wanting them to pledge allegiance every day? Anybody remember? What's that?
Patriotism.
Patriotism. Yeah, they wanted them to learn some patriotism. Anything else?
To be like morally sound, like everybody as a group together pledging the allegiance.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know.
I don't know either. Go ahead, Stephen, quick.
Was it because they don't teach religion in schools and they just teach you to be a good citizen of the United States and that you were supposed to do it because they're teaching you to do that?
Well, I'm not sure about the religion. Well,
So-
okay, I think I know what you're saying, but as usual, it's confusing.
Okay.
Okay, I think basically what they were saying is that this is not a religious activity. So we're not trying to change people's lives, win souls, and things like this. But really, we're trying to teach you good citizenship and patriotism and respect for the government, respect for authority. What did the court hold the first time they heard the case? Could these kids be suspended, or were they allowed to come back and not have? Go ahead, Ross.
They said that they could be suspended the first time.
The first time they said they were going to be suspended, and when the suspension was legal, the school was right. This isn't religion, but this is about patriotism and loyalty and these kinds of intangibles. What happened to the kids? Did they come back and actually stand?
No, and they literally got tarred and feathered.
No,
Tarred
one-
and feathered.
One
What else?
got tarred and feathered.
Castrated.
The other
One got castrated. What else? A number of them just got beaten up. And we're talking about little kids, 9, 10, 12 years old.
2.
Oh, there were more than that. There were more than 2. So this time, there was another case. And they released the case on Flag Day, the ruling. What did the court hold when they heard this a second time?
They flipped their decision.
They did.
They were no longer on the side of school, but on the kids who got beaten up.
Yeah, the Supreme Court caught 10 kinds of hell because these kids got beaten up, castrated, tarred, and feathered, and all these other things. And when they caught all of this hell, they basically had a case less than a year later. They released the verdict on Flag Day, which was not an accident. And they basically said, you know what, we might have made a mistake here. This really is a religious kind of a thing. So in fact, the kids wouldn't be suspended anymore. And in theory, this would end the violence. Because the sense was that had the Supreme Court ruled the way that they should have, some people would argue the first time, then the violence would have never happened to the kids. And these are just little kids. Understand with stare decisis, in that first case, 40 years, the tree's roots are in the ground pretty far. We're not going to be able to dig out a tree after it's grown for 40 years. But when you think about planting a tree and 1 year later, you can still get that one out of the ground. And that's what happens. The longer something remains valid law, the less likely it's ever going to be overturned. Any other questions from these? Let me get to the articles. And if you look at Chapter 2 articles, there's a few that are up here. ERA was pretty straightforward kind of a thing. The webcams article. Do y'all remember the webcams article?
Yes.
For the cars, right?
For the cars. Go ahead, Kara.
I really want to say it was Allstate, but I don't know if it is. But it's an insurance, and they wanted to put in.
Was it insurance or was it the fine state of Maryland that did this? Fine state of Maryland that did this.
For insurance purposes, whatever. So if you like steer too hard or you brake with the car.
You brake with the car.
Yes, if you did that too quickly, then it would catch you on camera.
If you do something that is going to alter the G-forces of the car, such as accelerate too quickly, hit the brakes too fast, swerve around, you know, and the G-forces alter, they put cameras. Where do they put these cameras? They put it on the dash so that it would capture the entire front seat. I believe they also put them on the outside so that you could see what was going on from the front of the car grill as well. What would these cameras do? So the cameras would come on. How long would they film? About 20 seconds, maybe a little bit longer, but 20 seconds. They would catch the front seat, and then what would happen to these videos?
They get.
No. They get sent to the
major.
They got.
They get sent to the company, and the company sends that to their
I
parents.
believe
The people
they
that
were
were doing
sent
the
to
research
University
survey
of Maryland,
would get the
right?
videos. And then ultimately, if it was driving related, then these videos would be sent to the parents. And the object was that if parents know that you're making driving mistakes, then they will correct you on making these driving mistakes, which ultimately is going to make you drive better. What were the concerns that were raised about this?
If it was not a driving mistake, then the University of Maryland was not required to send.
Okay, that's true, but what was the biggest complaint about this? Why would you not want this in your car?
Invasion of privacy.
Invasion of privacy, that's exactly what it was. This is my car, this is my property, and we talked about this within the context of the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property. After a year, what did they find?
It helped like almost all of them to be better drivers.
People were basically having about, I don't know, 87, 88% fewer videos sent back at the end of 1 year than at the beginning. And the argument would be is that this really is making the road safer, so, you know, there's order that's involved. But in order to improve order, you got to take away freedom. And a lot of you said, I don't want to give away my freedom, even if it means I'll be safer on the road. I think this is about the point where y'all got on Summer, because she's an Asian woman driver. You got on Stephanie in the 9 o'clock because she's an Asian woman, and yet y'all were talking about who the worst drivers were. So maybe the worst drivers should have this required. The other thing, if I'm not mistaken, was that many of y'all changed your mind if you knew you could get a insurance discount. And if you could get an insurance discount because you had driven better, a lot of you were willing to give this up. And this is where we started talking about some of the insurance companies that were doing this. Land grab. What was the land grab?
Whorehouses were going to be down.
The whorehouses?
No.
The poorhouses. I was like, wow. I remember that article. Okay. The poorhouses. Go ahead.
The whorehouses were being, everybody was going to be evacuated. No.
Where was this?
New York? Maybe?
Connecticut. It was. It was going to be
Always
Connecticut.
comes back to Connecticut.
Who wanted these houses? Who wanted this land?
I think it was the government for...
It was a land development company. And what did they want to build? Malls and what else?
Like those kinds of
High-rise condominiums, luxury condominiums, hotels, office spaces, malls, restaurants, these kinds of things. Why did they want to do it? What would this do?
Bring money in.
It's going to bring money in. Yes. How? Anybody?
Create jobs.
It's going to create jobs, so we're going to get income taxes. Tell me more.
It's just going to stimulate the economy overall.
It's going to stimulate the economy overall.
People are going to be moving to that area. You're going to get more people like in jobs. I don't know, everything. Probably more development. Will like build houses around that area.
Yeah. So you're going to have higher tax revenues, number one, income tax, higher property tax revenues. You're going to be creating jobs. People are going to spend money there in the area.